This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Kinnus Chaf Aleph. One of the most dramatic highlights of Tisha B'Av is Kinnus Chaf Aleph, Arzei Levanoin, depicting the murder of the Asar Harugei Malchus, the 10 martyrs, 10 great Tanoim who were murdered, even though they were not murdered at the same time historically. But this is more of a emotional pull to describe the death of all 10 at the same time, because 2 of them did not even live at the same time as the other 8. Now on Yom Kippur we understand why we talk about the Asar Harugei Malchus. In the Eila Ezkara, the Gemara in Moed Katan says, Misas Tzadikim Mechaperes Lama Nismacha Misas Miriam Leparshas Para Aduma Ma Para Aduma Mechaperes Af Misas Tzadikim Mechaperes. But the question is, why do we read about the murder of these tzaddikim on Tisha B'Av? They were not murdered even at the time of the Churban. Says the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, because Shkula Misas Tzadikim Kisreifas Beis Elokeinu. The death of the righteous is like the burning of the temple. So as we mourn the Churban, we mourn a tragedy equal to it, but not greater than it. The Kina begins. Arzei Halavanoin, cedars of Lebanon, Adirei HaTorah, giants of Torah, Balei Treisen, shield bearers, B'Mishnah V'Gemara, Giborei Kayach, powerful warriors, Amaleha B'Tahara, who toil in purity. The Kina goes on to depict how they bring in Reb Shimon Gamliel and Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, and each beg the executioner, please kill me first, so I will not have to bear to see the death of my associate. And the executioner was so overwhelmed. In the 10th line we read, Yadu Goyro mi Rishain lacherav brura. They cast lots to see who would be put to the sword first. Kinafol Goyro al Rabbi Shimon, Pashat Savaroi Ubacha Kinigzera Gezera. When the lot fell out on Rabbi Shimon, he stretched out his neck and cried when the decree was issued. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was the Nasi. He was the great-grandson of Hillel, direct descendant of King David. Says the Mishnah Berurah on Simon Nun Gimel. He brings from the Sefer Chasidim that when Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was taken out to be killed, he asked Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, my dear brother, why am I being taken out to be killed as a criminal? I'm not a sinner. Rabbi Shmuel replied, perhaps one time you were being Doresh Barabim. Maybe one time you were lecturing to the masses, and in your heart you felt personal pleasure, and you benefited improperly from the Torah. Reb Shimon replied, Achi nichamtani. If you look on the bottom line, Mizera Aroin Shoal Bevakasha Bevakos Al Ben Hagvira. The progeny of Aaron, meaning Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, requested to be able to cry over the son of royalty, Reb Shimon. Natal Roishoi v'Nosnai al Arkubaisav. He took his severed head. He took the severed head of Reb Shimon and placed it on his lap. Menorah hatahoira, pure menorah. Sameinav aleinav upiv al piv bi'ahava gemura. He put his eyes on the eyes of Reb Shimon Gamliel. He put his mouth on his mouth in true love. Anav Amar. He cried out and he said, Peh hamizgaber ba'Torah, mouth that strengthened in Torah, pisoim niknesa alav misa meshuna. The Mekainen relates that they ordered and they turned to Reb Shimon Gamliel, and they skinned off his head with a sharp razor. And as they shaved off the head of Reb Shimon, he did not make a sound. He did not feel. But says the Kina, Rasha, ha-poishet, esigia limkoim tefillin mitzvahs bara. When the wicked man reached the place on Rabbi Shmuel's head where he put on the tefillin, tzak, tzaka, he cried out. He can no longer remain silent. V'nizdazo olam v'eretz hispayrara, and the world shook, and the earth crumbled. By the way, the Ramami Pano writes that Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol was the soid of Yoshiyahu HaMelech. The Mekoinen then laments the torturous murder of Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara in Brachas tells us Rabbi Akiva was imprisoned for teaching Torah publicly. They took Rabbi Akiva out at the time of Kriyas Shema. On the 9th line on page 250, Me'acharav Hevius Rabbi Akiva. This took place 60 years after Churban Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi Akiva was 120 years old. Rabbi Akiva's penetrating analysis could uproot mountains and grind them together. Sarku es besoroi b'masrek shel barzel hishtabra. Yatzisa nishmasai be'echad. His soul departed as he said the word echad. His Talmidim asked him, Rebbe, how are you able to say Shema even at a time like this? Says Rabbi Akiva, every day of my life, when I recited the Kriyas Shema, I aspired to be able to give up my life al Kiddush Hashem. B'chol levavecha u'b'chol nafshecha, afilu hu noitel es nafshecha, va'achshav shabo liyadi lo yakaymena. And Baskal Amra, Ashrecha, Rabbi Akiva, Gufcha Tahar, B'chol Minei Tahara. Kina Chaf Aleph, Arze Halavanon, Adire HaTorah. Kina Chaf Beis. Some commentaries say that Kina Chaf Hey is the first Kina that speaks about tragedies unrelated to the Churban. Rav Soloveitchik argues very compellingly that it is in fact Kina Chaf Beis that is the first Kina that commemorates a tragedy outside of the Korban. This Kina commemorates the massacres of the Kehillah Shum, Spires, Varmaizam, Agensa, during the first Crusades of Tatnu, 1096. And accordingly, there's one line in this Kina that can only be understood in the context of the Crusades. If you look in the 9th line, Miyafli Naziros Umiyaroich Nedarim. Miyafli Naziros Umiyaroich Nedarim. Who will now interpret the intricacies of Naziros? Who will arrange the complex laws of oaths? It would seem strange that the Kina refers to Nazirim. After all, I don't think there are any Nazirim currently in this Beis HaKnesses, nor do I think any of you know any Nazirim. So why are we lamenting Naziros and Nedarim? Says Rav Soloveitchik, the intent of the Paitan is to allude to two Masechtos of Shas that are extremely difficult. And the reason they're difficult is because we don't have Rashi on Masechta Nedarim and Masechta Nazir. On these two Masechtos, there is a commentary printed, purported to be Rashi, but it's not from Rashi. In fact, there were great Rishonim who lived in those times that had it not been for the Crusades, they would have been able to compose a commentary on these Masechtos to make them comprehensible to us. But because the Germans killed dozens of Balei HaTosfos, there was no one to write a commentary on Nazir and Nedarim, and therefore we lament Miyafli Nazirus Umiyarech Nedarim, because these Masechtas remain a closed book. The Paitan describes further the saga of how many Yidden took their own lives to avoid being forcibly converted. Like we mentioned in our introduction, this is a Kina we're very comfortable with. Actually, when we were in Portugal, we went to the Avram Zakuto Museum. Rabbi Avram Zakuto was one of the notable scholars of Spain and Portugal. His astrolabe and maritime charts were used by Vasco da Gama and by Christopher Columbus. Rabbi Avram Zakuto wrote a Sefer Hayuchsin, and he poses the following question. We know a Jew may not take their own life, but may one kill themselves to avoid conversion? And Rabbi Avram Zakuto brings many proofs, first from the Gemara in Gittin, where the Gemara says that the girls jumped overboard to avoid being violated because they darshaned Amar Hashem mi bashan ashiv mi mitzulas yam, that even if somebody falls to the depths of the sea and their molecules are scattered all over the world, Rebbe Hashem will reconstitute their molecules. So from here we learn one is allowed to kill themselves to avoid conversion. And finally, Rabbi Avram Zakuto brings the proof from the Gemara in Ksubis, where the Gemara says that a certain person who did not attend the funeral of Rebbe jumped off a roof because he missed out on the opportunity. So we see that there are times where because of spiritual ambition one may take their own life. And this is what we read in Kinnus Chav Beis. And we're going to see in Kinnus Chav Hey about the tragedies of the Crusades in 1090 and again in 1146. Kinnus Chav Beis. Hacharishu mimeni v'adabeira v'yavra alayma chamos azak v'shoyd l'cha shechin shamayma hatzikazni ruchi v'lo yuchal. Kinnus Lamed Aleph contrasts leaving Mitzrayim with leaving Yerushalayim. We're going to sing it together. Eish tu kad bekir bi b'haloisi halibi tzeisi mi Mitzrayim kini. Kinnus Lamed Vav Tzion Halois Shali. This Kinnus begins the last group of Kinnus. The Kinnus service ends with a group of 10 Kinnus. All of these 10 Kinnus, with the exception of Mem Aleph, begin with the word Tzion. And they are all concerned with the fact that Eretz Yisrael is the chosen land of God. Kinnus Lamed Vav was written by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, the greatest lover of Tzion. He was born in Toledo in 1080. He's a student of the Rif and the Rimagash. And aside from studying Talmud, Rabbi Yehuda became a master of literary style. Rabbi Yehuda was in love with the land of Israel. He was the one who penned the words, Libi ba'mizrach, while my heart is in the east, Vani b'seif marav, I am stranded in the farthest end of the west. There have been many great pilgrims who yearn passionately for Tzion. The Rambam in Mar Nevuchim only mentions Eretz Yisrael one time. In Chavis Havavos Rabbeinu Bachya does not even mention Eretz Yisrael once. Even the Ramban, he speaks about Eretz Yisrael in a halachic sense. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi expresses his passion in a literary style. He says on page 328, Miyasali kinafayim va'achik nedoid, who shall make me wings so I might wander? Anid lebisrei levavi, I would cause my shattered heart to wander. Bein b'saroyach. This echoes the words of Moshe Rabbeinu, where Moshe Rabbeinu davened 515 times. Hashem said, Genikshine, enough, stop davening. So Moshe said, okay, if you don't let me in, at least let me enter like a bird. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says, Apel, I would fall on your land, on my face. I would cherish your stones greatly. I would favor your dust. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi continues, Afki ba'omdi alei kivrei savoisai, even standing by the graves of your patriarchs. Be'ashtoimim alei chevroin, I behold in wonderment the choicest burial spots. Nivchar kivei royach, har ho'avarim, v'har hahar. Asher sham shnei oirim gedolim oirayach oirayach. From here we learn that part of the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael is imbued from the great tzaddikim who are buried there. Like we find when Nehemiah was asked, Madua lo yiru panai? Nehemiah was asked, how dare you serve me, the king says, with such a sullen face. And Nehemiah says, how could my face not be sullen? Asher ho'ir beis kivrois avoisai chareva. The city of the burial spot of my forefathers is destroyed. And then Rabbi Yehuda Halevi pens his most stirring words. Chaye neshamois avir artzech. The air of your land is the life of the soul. That the land of Israel literally has air with life-giving spiritual properties. So the question is, friends, these are the last 10 Kinnus. The problem is these are not Kinnus. Nothing is lamented. Nothing is mourned. All it talks about is the beauty, the sanctity of the land of Israel. What are they doing here in Kinnus? You have 10 Kinnus that are not Kinnus. But the answer is, as we've come to the conclusion of the Kinnus service, we always have to trace back to the beginning. How did we get into this mess in the first place? And that is because we cried over the land of Israel. We showed apathy to the land of Israel. We said, God, we're not interested in the land. So the Rebbe Shalom says, no problem. I'm not going to destroy the land as a punishment, but as a natural consequence. Because if you love the land as your homeland, how could you bring yourself to cry over it? So by showing apathy to Eretz Yisrael, we severed our soul bond to Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, at the end of Kinnus, in order to rectify this, we have to live the words of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. Tzion haloi sishali uleshloim asiroyach. To re-engender within our hearts the natural love of the Jew for Artzeinu HaKadosha. These are not Kinnus. These are expressing the objective of Kinnus. And that is to correct Vayivku ha'am balayla hahu. Kino lamed vav. Tzion haloi sishali uleshloim asiroyach. Okay. This Beis HaKnesses is named after the tzaddik, Rabbi Rabbi Glatstein, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha, who was a Holocaust survivor, who was in all the dark places, in Radom, in Auschwitz, and in Dachau. And when he was in Auschwitz, he saw them carrying away the old people. And the old people were crying, who's going to say Kaddish for us? And my grandfather accepted upon himself that if he were to survive, he would never forget the memory of these Kaddoshim. And he said Kaddish for them every single day of his life for 70 years. So this Beis HaKnesses is built on the memory of these Kaddoshim. We're going to say now one of the Kinnus that was composed for the Holocaust of Reb Shimon Schwab on page 386. Hazoicher mazkirin v'yara k'mo yisha v'tzireha v'chiv sulach agurasak al ba'al nireha Alei Armoin Asher Nutash V'ashmasoin Adareha V'al Bias Mecharfeya B'soich Mikdash Chadareha Alei Galus Mishar Seyel Mani Meishir Zimareha V'al Damam Asher Shupach K'may Meimei Yoireha Alei Hekia Mechai Leleha Asher Damam Biareha V'al Asher Shameim Uvitul Sanhedreha Alei Zivchei Semideha Ufid Yoinei B'chayreha Miachilul Kalei Heichal Umizbach K'toireha Alei tapei melacheha, b'nei David gevireha, v'al yafyam asher choshach, b'ei saruch esareha, alei chavoid asher gala, b'ei schorban devireha, v'al loichetz asher lochatz, b'sam sakim chagureha, alei machatz v'roiv makois, asher huku nizireha, v'al niputz alei sela, oila leha u'neoreha, alei simchas oyeveha, sachaku al shvareha, v'al inoi b'nei choyrin, nediveha tehoireha, alei fesha asher ibisa, selu derech ashureha, v'al tzivois kihaleha, shezufeha shechoireha, alei koilois mecharfeha, v'eis rabu figareha, v'al rigshas migadifeha, v'soich mishkan chatzereha, alei shimcha asher chulal, v'fi kamei mitzireha, v'yal tachan yitzav chulach, geshoy v'shma amoreha, alei tzion v'yareha, k'mo yisha v'zireha, v'chei shulach v'suas chagurasa,
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.